can you be true to yourself? Can you really be yourself under all circumstances and no matter what happens? When you get your ass whipped in the freaking Super Bowl, when you had 2 in a row and you're 2 seconds from doing it again, can you come back after that moment and still be who you are? That was what the challenge was to me, and as hard as that looked and hard as it felt and as hard as it was on all the people around me, I took it like this, okay, you knew this was going to happen sometime. Are you going to be the real deal or not?
All right. Today on the Matthews Mentality Podcast, we're joined by my former coach and one of the most legendary figures in football history, Coach Pete Carroll. Pete is the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders and the only person to ever win a Super Bowl and 2 NCAA national championships while maintaining one of the most distinct and inspiring leadership philosophies in sports. Over the decades, Coach Carroll has redefined what it means to build winning cultures, from reviving my USC Trojans into a college football dynasty to leading the Seattle Seahawks to their first ever Super Bowl title, and now taking on a new chapter with the Raiders across 50 plus years of coach. Is it 50 years?
Almost, yeah, somewhere in there.
Oh my goodness gracious. Coach Carroll has become known for his signature win forever mindset, a philosophy built on relentless competition, deep connection, and the belief that great performance starts with great culture. His Seahawks teams dominated with the Legion of Boom, set defensive records, and became one of the toughest, most unified squads in the NFL. And at USC, his Trojans were a force. We definitely were, producing Heisman winners, first-round draft picks, and one of the most electrifying eras in college football history. Pete's leadership style isn't just measured in trophies. It's in how he's influenced generations of players like myself, coaches, and executives across the NFL and NCAA, from John Wooden to Jerry Garcia. From neuroscience to Zen philosophy, Pete's approach to coaching and life is nothing short of extraordinary. Before we dive in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the Matthews Mentality Podcast. And if you're looking how to understand building world-class teams, cultures, and mentalities from one of the greatest leaders in sports history, this episode's for you. Coach Pete, Coach Carroll, welcome to the podcast.
What's up, brother?
It's good to see you.
Let's go.
I mean, you've been here 4 months. Like, how's it been now that you're with the Raiders?
It's been kind of as we had hoped, come in with the big flurry and all that, but we've just jumped right into the mentality. And I was telling the guys today as we start phase 3 of the off-season program that it's landed. It has landed. You can tell, and there's a different feeling around here, and there's a mentality of energy and juice and guys being challenged in competition and all of that. And you can tell, and so I was all cranked up today to, kick them into the third phase here where we get to go against each other, offense versus defense, and expect to maintain, a continued ascent, as we're growing in our makeup and our mentality. So we're on our way.
Are you still doing one versus ones?
Oh yeah, sure. We did that a number of times today. Yeah.
Iron sharpens iron. We would do so well on Saturdays at SC, and people would always say, "Man, how do you guys play so well?" It's like, well, practice is harder during the week,
Really?
And I remember
the guys get after me today because we went ones against ones most of the day until the 2-minute section of practice, and in that situation, I had ones versus twos, and then they would go, "Wait a minute, we got to go ones. We're not competing if we're not, So it's exactly how I would like them to respond.
And we'll jump around a little bit, but just from a head coach, the Jets, Patriots, SC, Seahawks, Raiders. Anytime you take over a program or organization, and maybe everyone's different, but what is the first thing you look to focus on, to change, to improve, or to kind of put your stamp on when you take over an organization?
Well, first thing, some of those programs you mentioned, I had no idea what I was doing. And, all the way back to the Jets and, when we went out to New England, even, it was after the New England firing that I figured stuff out in the way that now we still kind of stay in mode of, which was all about competition. So the very first things we do is set the tone that this is going to be a competitive environment, and the central theme of the program is competition, and start with that and start building, I've got some phrases, in terminology that helps me, relationship-based organization, and treat people really well, and we're going to very respectfully deal with everybody that we come in contact with, and the 3 rules, always protect the team, all those things that I use as kind of my entree to, what we mean and what we stand for. And like I was telling the team today, after 3 or 4 months, I don't even know how long it's been there. It's been a blur, but they get it. and they're on course with what we're doing. And if somebody new came in, they could tell them, how we act and how we're supposed to respond and the standards that we live by. And so we're rolling. So it feels good to be underway and to be making progress.
Yeah, we have 12 principles at Matthews, the real estate company. Second principle, always protect your teammates.
There you go. There you
Yeah.
go. That's where it's a big deal. And more than ever in coming back this time around, the whole teammate thing has become even more important than it's been in the past, which has always been important. But I recognize how people involved in the program can proactively operate with a thought in mind that they have to continue to develop themselves as a great teammate in all of the ways that you can do on a regular basis from moment to moment. How you treat people, how you look at things, and how you give of yourself, and all of those things have become even more important. And I'm really having fun uh, pounding away at our guys about it.
Now, you had said I'd mentioned the 5 head coaching stuff. She's like, well, a couple of those I may not have known what I was doing, and I'm certain from a football knowledge you did. And I wrote this down. I was preparing for this meeting, and I wrote this down. So I don't want it to sound like I'm reading this, but I don't know if you remember this, but when you first got to SC, you and I sat down randomly one day. It wasn't even a scheduled meeting, but we were both at Heritage Hall on campus. And you explained to me, we started talking. I don't know how we got on the topic, but you said something like when you left the Patriots, you might have had a year off of coaching, and it allowed you time to reflect on your experience there in the Jets. And one of the things that you were sharing with me was and I remember this vividly, was, I'll do the best I can to repeat it verbatim, was that you realized you didn't necessarily know what your like what was my philosophy as a coach. And in that year off, if I remember this conversation, you said, I realized my philosophy was competition. And you came into SC with this, and maybe it was new for you at the time, definitely in how you delivered it to us from day one. It was like, we are going to compete. And at the time, the philosophy was always compete, I think,
Right?
if I may.
Still is.
Do I remember that correctly? Like
Yeah. No,
the
that's
Jets and the Patriots, you knew you were a football mind off the charts, but something happened between the Patriots and SC where you kind of came up with your philosophy that
yeah.
really defined
Yeah,
you.
my story was really that was at the end of the coming to the end of the football season when I was sitting out, and I didn't want to go back as a coordinator. I didn't want to go get another job at that time. I finally had realized I wanted to be a head coach.
Mhm.
Up until then, I was just taking the jobs that the guys offered me, and I didn't have my act together at all, really. And it's frightful that I think about it, but I understand why I got let go. And when I was sitting out, I was at home in my office reading John Wooden's little blue book, and he said in his 14th year at UCLA, he won his first national championship. And I slammed the book closed, and in the moment, in the instant, it was so clear to me that I didn't have my act together because what I had known about Coach Wooden was that he was unusual. He had in distinctive ways and manners that came out of his upbringing and the very strong father leadership that he had in his spiritual leadership and all of those things that made him the unique person that he was. Once he figured out how to get his program in order that represented him, he won almost every championship after that,
Mhm.
and he won 10 of the next 12 or something national championships. And so I realized that as maybe as much as I thought I had my act together, I didn't. And I just realized that I got to get after it immediately and started writing in the next minute. I was started to get my papers together and started writing my philosophy. Or no, I didn't start with philosophy. I started with what I believed in and what I thought was important. And it went from everything that you can think of, from how you practice to how you play to how you coach and how you treat players and teachers and I mean, and players and
Mhm.
coaches, and in every way that I could think of. It took me days. I mean, this was a day's course of self discovery, is really what it was. And I got to the point I said, "Geez, I don't know how would I define myself? I don't know where I came up with that question. I don't know, but I said, well, my whole life I've been competing. I'm a competitor. And it just jumped at me that I'm going with that
Mhm.
because that was what was true to my entire upbringing. And so then that means that competition is a central theme and that my philosophy is going to be always compete. And the reason why, Kyle, this was so important at the time is I knew well enough that if you were really going to stand for something, it needed to come right from the center of your being,
Yeah.
and so that you could always stand for that. And the more I thought of it, the more I realized I could easily stand for competition and compete in everything. And we're in a relentless pursuit of finding a competitive edge in everything that we're doing. You either compete or you're not, and on and on and on. All of those things that rang so true to me, I could stand for those, and I could teach them. and then couldn't only teach them to players, but I realized that I was going to have to teach them to my coaches, so my coaches could represent and support my messaging, and I needed to do that in a really clear fashion. And so that all hit me within a couple days there. I mean, I had spiral notebooks, one after another, just kept ripping through pages and writing rules down and guidelines, and everything came out of that. I swiped Coach Wooden's rule about, no whining, no complaining, no excuses, was rule number
Mhm.
2 in the program. Always protect the team was rule number 1. And then my own deal about, rule number 3 is be early was about respect, and I mean, all of that stuff came together.
Mm.
So by the time I interviewed and I didn't know where I was going, I didn't know I didn't have any job, I didn't have anything going on, but by the time I got the interview at SC with Mike Garrett and Daryl Gross, I mean, I was so ready.
You were locked
I
in.
was so ready, and I couldn't wait to just let it all out. And by the time, if you remember, the media just blistered us, for
Oh,
the
yeah.
decision,
Yeah.
another NFL,
USC goes Carolling
yeah,
was
yeah,
the
it
LA
was
Times.
terrible, and so, but I couldn't care less. Yeah, I couldn't care less about what they thought because I knew I had something, and the extraordinary realization I have now, really, it's just in the last couple of years, is that after that thing that happened in like November of the year after I was let go at the Patriots, I went to USC. The rest is kind of history.
Yeah.
We did a lot of great stuff in the next 23 years or 24 years now. And so um, it was an epiphany, truly.
Yeah, I was about to ask, what do you think it was like an epiphany? It
It
just
was. It was truly an epiphany of
Yeah.
of and it happened in a flash of a moment, and it compelled me to start writing everything down. And what the teaching that comes out of this is to help other people realize that until you go through the self-discovery process and you really find out what is important to you and what are your uncompromising principles, what do you stand for, what will you not ever back away from, until you get to the point where you can write that stuff down. Most people will think about things, but they won't write it down and then look at the words, and do the words absolutely represent the truth that lies within you? When you get to that point, now you've figured stuff out, and you'll take the next step. That doesn't mean it's the final step, but it is that process that's necessary, and that's what happened. And really, my philosophy hasn't changed since. Um, uh, uh, Side note:
No, go for it.
there
Yeah.
was there was a time in the springtime at SC that SC, one of the teachers there, would invite Coach Wooden to come over and speak to the journalism class that he was teaching. And Coach would come over every spring. And so they eventually hooked us up, and I got a chance to visit with him, talk with him every year. And they'd set aside a little 30-minute period where I could ask him some questions and hang out or whatever. And about the second or third year he came in there, I asked him, I thought about it, and I came up with this question: Coach, how much do you change your philosophy from year to year? And he looked at me, and I went, "Oh, no." He looked at me like, "Come on, coach. What are you thinking?" And I
Yeah.
felt like a 12-year-old kid. Just
Yeah,
asked the
yeah.
wrong question. He said, "You don't change your philosophy. You either believe in it or you don't." He said, "The players change. And as the players change, the philosophy kind of melds and adapts and finds its way through the players and their mentality." And of course, that was right. It was a really stupid question. I knew better. But anyway, that's really how this happened. And this is really exciting for me to revisit it for a third time, because
Yeah.
SC was one, and Seattle was the next one, and this one. And I think I'm the farthest along with the depth of understanding about how to do this. And so I'm really excited to watch it happen.
There's so many things I want to go over, and I prepared a lot. I'm going to jump to the sixth thing I wrote down. I remember you telling a story about a meeting. I think you said that told this to the team. I remember you telling a story about a meeting you had with the legendary coach John Wooden, where you were maybe in a debate, like, or it was maybe a question you asked, and maybe this was one of those 30-minute
Yeah,
sessions.
yeah.
Is it harder to build a championship program or to stay a championship program? I think it
Yeah.
was what it was. And again, I was an 18 to 22-year-old knucklehead, but I remember either you were taking the position. I think it's harder to build one because you're having to sell something that isn't proven. You're kind of have to selling a vision, and he might have said, it's harder to maintain. Or what do you remember that? And
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
and my question is, having done both now, you built one at USC and then you had to try and maintain it, and then you built one at Seattle and had to try and maintain it. What do you think? Like, is it harder to build one from, a program that, or a team that hasn't experienced winning, or is it harder to maintain that when you
Well, I think
have the
there's
success?
great challenge and difficulty in both ends of it, because you got to get there. You got to find your way to
Yeah.
it first. I think people can find their way to it because they stumbled into it sometimes. and you get the right mix of people, coaches, whatever, and then you're fortunate and things work out. I do think it's more difficult to maintain it because of the challenges of that you deal with after people have won a championship. They're much greater almost than the ones when you're building, because of all of the influence and the effect from the outside in, and what you wind up having to deal with. And I think that I love that challenge. I kind of naively asked a question that when the first meeting I had when I was at the Patriots, they had just come off the Super Bowl and they had lost to the Packers. And I asked the question. I said, "Raise your hand. How many people think they want to win the greatest thing in the world is to win the Super Bowl?" And a bunch of guys raised their hand. I said, "How many people think it's the greatest thing might be to win two in a row?" And 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 the guys didn't even know they didn't know how to answer, and because why would you ask that? Well, to me, that's what the whole point of the thing
Yeah.
is. Can you win one and you come back and do it again? Can you do it again? And can you maintain consistency? That's where the win forever mentality came
Yeah.
from. And that was like it was really awesome to do something great, but can you rediscover what it takes to get there again is really the great challenge. And remember that story came from the first game I had coached at when I was at the Jets. We played the long-standing AFC East champion Buffalo Bills in the opening game at their place, and we beat them like 23-6 or whatever the heck it was. We beat them handily in the first game. My first game ever as a head coach. And I
You,
probably was
you said,
thinking,
"Man, this is easy."
yeah, this is no big deal. It's all that. So in my gloating way, I walked out into the stadium before we got on the buses. Got all dressed up, and we're ready to go. And I walked out in the stadium just to kind of feel it one more time. And as I turned around, I looked up, and on the wall of their stadium, they had the banners of their winning division winners. Remember they had lost 4 Super Bowls,
Yeah.
but they had won the division for like 7 years in a row or something
Yeah.
like that. And I remember distinctly the moment saying, "Man, now that's winning forever." And that's where that came from. And that was the thought.
Huh.
The greatness of being able to sustain, excellence is really, I think, the greatest marker of a champion. And so that's been with me ever since.
See, I thought, yeah, I made the assumption I hadn't heard the Bills moment. I thought always compete and what you had instilled in SC, and then the winning we experienced evolved into kind of a bigger philosophy of win forever. I was
No,
I
it
was
was way before that.
interesting. I was
Yeah.
I was blessed enough to go to your class a month or two ago at SC. Is that
Yeah.
are you done?
Yeah, we're done.
Are you
We
done? But
finished a week
you're a
ago.
professor, right?
Yeah,
Professor Carroll.
semi.
Yeah. So, but in how it's kind of it's a win forever philosophy, and you wrote a book about it, and you're teaching a class. Like, what could you share with the audience? You already dove in so much, but about this philosophy and how they can apply it in their personal lives or their professional
Well, it
lives.
took us 15 weeks in class to try to get that point
Yeah.
across.
Can you just
But
condense down to 3 minutes?
yeah. Really, the thought was, if you want to win forever, always compete. And so the driving force is really that finding what that mentality is, so that you can compete on a regular basis. And competition is a kind of a term that's thrown around a lot. And I found a way to define it that made sense for me, and that was striving for excellence. And it's not necessarily trying to beat somebody. That's what everybody thinks of competition. Rub somebody's nose in the dirt because you just whipped them or whatever. That's not what it is. It's about realizing that you can strive to do things well in everything that you do, in every aspect of your life. And if you want to be a great player, then you need to take care of yourself, and you need to lift and run and work out and get strong, study and work at your craft in every way that you can, and eat right, nutrition
Mhm.
wise, and do everything that you can possibly do. You can compete to be a good person. You compete to be a good friend. You compete to be a good teammate, and on and on. And that is the mentality that really we taught in the class, is to try to understand that life is about competing if you want it to be. And if you choose to look at it in that manner, then you can always find ways to strive to do things in a better fashion. And so uh, that's what always competing is. It's being in a relentless pursuit of finding a competitive edge in everything you're doing. Imagine what that mentality would be. Well, that's what we're teaching. You can, and it doesn't have to be stressful and somewhat something that overwhelms you and takes over your life. You can just find a way to see things in that manner. Well, I can work at it. I can battle to find out a better understanding, a deeper relationship, a deeper uh, uh, sense of passion, a deeper sense of how to persevere, and all of the things that make up what really competitive, highly successful people have in them. And so that's really what has been the pursuit of it, is to try to share that idea. And so for me, I have to live it, and which isn't hard because that's who I am. And so it's actually very easy for me to do it. It drives people crazy, but because I'm still going and still working it and still every day. We just had, like I said, the day of practice today was awesome out there. Our guys were battling and running around having
That's
fun and
great. Yeah.
cheering and pushing one another and all that. Well, that's what we stand for. That's what we're trying to convey, and it's a way to look at your world. What was really exciting in the teaching part of it at SC, we had a tremendous class of achievers. Um, they're all most. There was only a couple of guys that weren't in their senior final semester. They had their last class with us, was the last class on a Thursday night that they'll ever take in college, and so we had them all the way to the very end
Yeah.
when they're stepping into graduation and the occupation and achievement and all the rest of those things, figuring out their lives. And it was so rewarding. It was so rewarding to spend the time with them and to get them to see the world a little differently than they had, and they those that have chosen to, which was a lot of them in the class, they've chosen to take it on with a different outlook. That they're going to battle and they're going to find their way to stay on course with figuring out how they can do things better in every way that
Yeah,
they
when
can
I
come
when
up
I
with.
when I got to your class, I got there because a coach of mine in college told me if you're 15 minutes early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, you had to meet Coach O at 5 a.m. and Coach O would make us, he would make us roll until we threw up.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
luckily I was
He
never
was he was
late.
really good at that.
He was great at it. I think he actually liked it. I'm
Of course he
gonna
did.
be sitting down with Coach O in a couple weeks, so I'm
Great.
excited for that. But yeah, I remember you touched on this earlier. It's like one of the rules was be
Be
early.
early.
It's a
Yeah.
respect thing. So I tell people at our company, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, you better start rolling. But
Mm.
and so I'm at your class. I'm 15 minutes early, and then you walk in, and there's a hoop. There's a hoop in the class, and you just start making college students again, like some are athletes, but some aren't. Like, hey, come on, we're shooting, we're competing, we're going, and like, it got pretty fired up in the class. And then you rolled into it. You had Coach Steve Kerr there, which was awesome. And
Oh,
then
yeah, that's good
I
night.
saw you had like Tom Brady on this class. So yeah, I'm sure it was a great experience for them, and it was a different experience for you, right?
Yeah,
I mean, as similar. Yeah, I mean, you've
I'm
been
doing the
teaching
same
your whole
stuff.
life. Yeah,
It's the same stuff, but it was what was unique about it was the students were so
yeah,
unique. They had so many stories and they had so many challenges, and with those are the most highly achieving, accomplished students in the university, at least through the Marshall School, and they got a world of issues, they had a world of issues. And here they are, as successful as you could possibly be, and they've all graduated, and they've all got
but
great
they're all
grades, and they've
dealing
all
with their
almost
own.
all are having
Yeah,
jobs or internships and things with enormous opportunities for themselves, and they're struggling to
yeah,
figure it out and to find it, and it's it's balancing the the expectations that come from so many different directions. I mean, they would talk about it and wanted to share it, and there was so many really heartfelt, emotional, crying sessions and after class was just when the night began, and so it was really, really deep and rewarding and all that. And I wish them all the best. They just graduated this weekend, so
yeah,
they filled up the university. I mean, the Coliseum a number of times, with the different schools going through and all
sure.
that.
That's
And
good.
we had a commencement speaker was there. He was in our
Yeah.
class and he kicked butt and that was just really it was a great
Well, I
experience.
want to stay on
Go.
always competing and college kids. So, I did a podcast. It was called Bussin' with the Boys, where I shared some of the stories of what SC was like back in the day. Because the hosts were like, "What was it like? Was it really like this?"
Yeah, I
Really? And
saw it. Yeah, I liked
yeah, I
it.
think some of the guys shared it with you. And one of the stories that people keep asking me about that I shared on that podcast, like, did that really happen? Was when spring ball, you had just signed the number one recruiting class. Every year you were always the number one or right up there, and you would sit us down and you'd say, hey, spring, and I'm going to paraphrase here, spring is for you guys. You guys are here. This is your showcase. This is your moment to shine, because in the fall, we got some young men coming in that we just signed that we're excited about, and we're going to give them the reps. And I want you to understand they're going to come in. They're here to take your jobs, and it's always an open competition. Best player plays. and you would sit us and we would have to watch the highlights. You would play the highlights for us. And like people like, wait, that really happens? Like, oh, 100%. I mean, what
We just did that last week
did
here.
you?
Yeah, sure. We showed them the rookies coming in. Did the exact same thing.
I was about to ask, do you
Yeah.
guys still do that? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we sure did. And really the same perspective. Show them, that not for them to look at the film and figure out who the guy are, but just to make the statement that these guys are coming into battle for it and they're going to get a look because we got to see if they can help our team. They're not going to be sitting on the bench waiting for this opportunity somewhere down the road. And we want to develop them so that halfway through their first year, they can help us as regular players if we do it right. And so
I wrote a sub
exactly
question.
what we did.
It's funny. I wrote a sub question like, do you think you could get away with that with the culture players today? And in college, like transfer portal era, like, do you think they would? For us, we just had to sit there and like, okay, like bring it on,
Yeah.
let's go. But I didn't know if you felt the culture had changed. But it sounds like you're still doing it.
I did it just last week.
Yeah, that's funny.
Or whatever. It was right after the draft.
I've carried so many lessons of leadership that honestly, unknowingly, I learned at SC when you were the coach, and how to run a high performance organization, but keep it intensely, but keep it fun, keep it loose. For all the leaders across like all industries, professions who are listening, from CEOs down to someone who's managing people for the first time, like, what's your best advice for building a team or an organization that plays to win like every single day?
Yeah, I do think that there's some lessons here. I think you have to clearly know who you are, so that you can be the consistent image of what you're speaking about, speaking to. If you're not, then you're BS to me. If you're trying to talk about somebody else's philosophy or how that's, this is how they do it, so we're going to do it this way. I don't think you have a chance. You're going to get found out. They're going to know you're BS, and so I think to do this, you have to do the work. You got to do the work and settle in. I know that even when you do a great job of this long process of really being able to write out the principles you will not compromise, and your beliefs on, and getting to that point, you still have to kind of fake it till because you don't know how to do it until you do it. It's like watching all of these first time hotshot head coaches in the NFL, like I was a couple times when I got fired. I didn't have a clue. I didn't know what I was doing. And there's the jobs that people are heading into, the challenges that they're heading into are so unknown for the most part.
Mhm.
And people will not be able to have their act together well enough to pull it off, particularly if you don't know who you are, what you stand for, what you're all about. So everything that we did in our class, everything we do with our players, we go right into sharing your stories, and we're talking about, who are the people you're dealing with, and trying to figure that part out, and learning who the learners are has been the phrase we've always leaned on. You have to know the people. That's why it's a relationship based organization that we operate in, and we need to have this openness about relationship and respect, and how you're going to treat people. All of those things have to happen to me, or you're going to borderline on just overseeing and
Mhm.
overlooking what people do. And then they're not necessarily connected to the message. You can still operate well. In the military, they treat people like crap. They cut their hair off. They put them in the same clothes. They make them speak the same, talk the same. They yell at them, scream at them, and they don't give them any freedom at all. And then they know that they can get guys to be held accountable for
Mhm.
some things. But you can only be held accountable for so much if you only allow people to have that little freedom. And so that's good for soldiers. But if you want people to highly achieve and be creative and operate freely so that they can really innovate and create change and all that, you got to give them space to do that. And until they can feel the confidence that you have in them, and how you believe in them and how you see them. For me, it's how to see these players and the people in our organization uniquely, extraordinarily themselves, and help them figure that out, and then help them feel supported and
Mhm.
feel confident. All of that is part of the process of building an environment where you can have people achieve at a really high level. We ain't doing this just to be normal. We're doing it to be great, and you have to open up the avenues for people to find their own personal greatness. They don't have to be as good as somebody else. They just need to be as good as they can be, and that's it's a real challenge, and it's not well understood, I don't think, and it's something that we really try to lean on, because I think it's something that we've done really well over the year. We've helped people find the best that they have in themselves, and when you do that, and they know they can trust you, and you can help them trust themselves, then they can really focus. They
Yeah.
can really bear down, and they can really bring their best consistently. But we're looking for uncommon consistency is really what we're looking for. And so you have to find people and help them connect with what they can repeat, how they can build that championship way again.
So, no, that's a great answer in terms of leading people. I wanted to take that to the individual level of, in football, you need great players to win. It's the X's and the O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. But in business, my experience, you need great professionals to win, great teammates. Outside of physical talent in football, which is required, in your opinion, from a mentality standpoint, what was the common characteristic or trait that you noticed in the greats? Because in the
In the
NFL,
greats,
in the NFL, like to a degree, and there are levels to physical talent, but the gap between the best and worst player on an NFL team is much smaller than college, which is smaller than high school. But what, from a mentality standpoint, like what separated the greatest players you ever coached with all the other players that maybe physically might have been at par, but they weren't able to
yeah.
achieve their maximum potential?
Well, it is what I've always looked for. It's what I'm seeking. I'm seeking to see that extraordinary aspect of themselves that separates them from other
The-
people. And I didn't always have the language to explain it until I learned about Angela Duckworth. She's talking about grit. And Dr. Angela Duckworth from Penn was somebody that I just came across, but she was talking about a concept of grit that people have that they had determined in her research that was the most important element of a makeup of a person that's successful. And it started with passion, and then it moved to having this perseverance, this ability to overcome, and then it had to do with resilience. This a belief in yourself and in your background and your makeup that would allow you to overcome the obstacles so that you could stay true, so that you could become what you were capable of becoming. And but really what it comes down to, it comes down to that enormous chip on your shoulder that makes you
Yeah.
just have to keep pushing to prove that you belong, and that this is where you dwell, and this is where you excel. And it's that chip on the shoulder that it isn't those that are the most talented. It isn't the ones that are the most gifted intellectually. It's the people that just have something burning inside themselves that they got to prove it, and that takes you much farther. That's where Angela and I, we saw eye to eye. And when I heard her podcast, matter of fact, I was listening to her podcast. It was a TED Talk, excuse me, years ago, and I'm sitting in my office in Seattle, and she's talking about grit, and I'm buying into it. We're talking about, I'm always looking for great competitors. She's talking about, she's looking for gritty performers, and she gets to the end of her talk, and she says, "But the problem we have is we really don't know how to develop grit." And I said, and I immediately said, "What are you talking about?" Like I'm talking to her on the TED Talk,
Mhm.
And remember Ben Malcolmson?
Yeah.
I said, "Ben, get Dr. Duckworth on the phone. We got to talk to her right now." And 15 minutes later, boom, I'm talking to her, and in my numbness, I'm thinking like she just stepped off the stage of the TED Talk. I said, "Remember what you just said?
Yeah. It
You just
was
said that you
filmed weeks or
yeah,
months ago.
that was
Yeah.
years ago. It
Yeah.
was like 3 years
Oh, okay.
earlier. She had made that statement, and I said, "You can teach grit. We do it every day. We teach people how to fall in love with what their game more so that they thought they loved it, but now they really know so because we've connected the important elements to them, and we've driven them and drilled them to become more resilient and to persevere. They can stand the hard times and the difficult challenges even more so, and we can give them belief in why they should know that they can come back and overcome. And so anyway, we have this big battle, and we since then we've developed a great friendship. And
Did she come to your side of the fence?
well, I have won her over, kind
Okay.
of,
You're working
but
on
she's
it?
she's pretty stubborn. She's pretty gritty herself, So, but it's been an ongoing
So you
conversation for
look
us.
for grit. Is there a way, before you get to the developing it phase, is there a way to test for that? And I don't just
Well,
mean
she
it.
has, yeah, she has all kinds of,
She does,
she has all kinds of stuff.
I'm gonna have to
It is,
incorporate this into our
it is what you
hires.
should, yeah.
Yeah.
It is what you should incorporate because it is that makeup
Mm.
that's true, and it's instinctively, when you're playing sports and playing with guys and working out, I think you can sense it pretty clearly. And
Yeah.
I've always said that the guys I want on my team are the guys I want to pick in the hoops game at the park that I want to play with. I
Yeah.
want that guy. And that's really what we try to use as our guiding light. As we choose people to join the program. And so And it was great to come back here again in Las Vegas to set up with John Spytek and get our mentality right, and these are the guys that we're looking for, and really got back to the roots of it. Sometimes you can kinda get lost in the,
Mhm.
year after year after year, and you don't do quite as good a job of digging into the real elements that make you, and you get caught up in the glitz and the glamour of some
Mhm.
guys and all that, and, right here, we started all over again, and I really was firm about it, and John was all on board and with it as well, and so we chose guys that we wanted to play with.
It's exciting. Yeah.
So
Getting
it's
to you kinda gives a a clean slate, a blank canvas as
yeah.
well.
Yep.
I actually had written down a question, about adversity, and you kinda dealt with it, is like, what advice do you have for people overcoming adversity? And it sounds like, that really gets to the grit thing that we just discussed. Is there a moment in your career that you'd be willing to share where you felt faced real adversity and how
Are you
you
kidding?
well,
Oh, I appreciate you not bringing up any specifics, but, yeah, there are things that have come up in my career that, just getting fired a bunch of times, if nothing
Yep,
else, and having to go home and say, "Hey,
yep.
I don't have a job anymore," and we gotta figure that out, and, yeah, there's lots of times, but there is a mentality, and I've kinda grown up, I always give it back to mom, and she taught me that something good is just about to happen, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was about optimism, and it was about seeing things for what they could be and rather than sometimes what they look like they are,
Mhm.
and, that's given me an outlook that's kept me going for years. I mean, I got fired, by Leon Hess at the Jets. He's sitting across the table like we're sitting right now, and he said, "A man in the business world would resign, Pete, but I know you're not gonna do that, so you're fired." And so I looked at him like I'm looking at the devil, and, in the very next moment, I thought, "Wow, I got 3 years of my contract. We're going to Disney World." You know?
Yeah.
And that was exactly what I thought,
Yeah.
and I didn't in the blur of it, I didn't have a clue what he had just said to me, anything else other than "You're fired," and he went on to talk, and I wasn't listening, and, that helps, I'm
Mhm.
lucky that my mom, kinda hammered me with that whatever, and I've adopted that something good just about to happen, and that's an outlook that does allow you to be resilient. It does allow you to hang tough and persevere, and so it's been part of my makeup for a long time. I can't say that you can hand that to somebody. You can give it to them as a
Mhm.
guideline, but they have to adopt it, to really own it, and so
Last question for you. It kind of gets to complacency to a degree, and there's so many times um, I meet people, and I've done this myself, where it's like, oh, if I just do this, and I'll be happy. If I just win a Super Bowl, right? If I just make this much money, if I just make the league, whatever it is, like then I'll be happy. And sometimes, God willing, you achieve these things. If I win a Super Bowl, if I win a national championship, and there's a period of bliss, right? And I always say 72 hours where you're like, wow, I just did that, or we just did that. But then it's like, okay, what's next? And you've accomplished so much, and especially within your profession, you've pretty much won everything you can win, and yet here you are doing it again. Like, is it just is it highly competitive, high achievers are driven to, no pun intended, just reset the goalposts when they get to the end zone? Have you ever thought about why you do that, or why a lot of really successful people do it?
I would try to make you understand that it isn't about winning the championship. It's not about that. It's being recognized, I think, from your own standpoint and from others that, you're the real deal, and look out, we're coming back. And that was just then. That's already over with. As soon as you win it, it's over with. It's in your back pocket, and you've already done that, and so that's to me, that's not the motivator even. It isn't the motivator to win. His motivator is to be the best you can possibly be, and that's ongoing, never ends. I'm not a big goals guy. If
Mhm.
remember, I'm not a big goals guy,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to knock anybody who has built their life around setting goals and all that kind of stuff, but goals you achieve them, and to me, I want ongoing, never ending aspirations, of being great at what you're doing, and want to help players understand what that's all about, and so that there is no one game that is the only game. There is no one accomplishment that's the only accomplishment. Is can you come back again? And is that really who you are? And is that worth fighting for? And if it is, then you're on my team. I
Mhm.
want to play with you. So it's a little different way of looking at it. And
Sure.
so those accomplishments. It's just yeah. just like these kids coming out of USC. They finally got the job that they always wanted, or they've graduated from a major university. Now what?
Now what?
That means nothing. It's already over. You already did it. You've
Yeah.
accomplished that. If that's all there is, then you're left. You're left standing by yourself. You don't know where to go. You don't know what to do, and that's really common. It's not uncommon. That's common. That's the
Mhm.
way people, have been driven, and so there's a lot more to it. And I think there's a lot more to it that adds richness to your life, and it keeps you pushing and keeps you. Uh, Striving for the top of your game, and to be the best you can possibly be, and to be of all of those things to me, Kyle, it's can you be true to yourself? Can you really be yourself under all circumstances and no matter what happens? When you get your ass whipped in the freaking Super Bowl, when you have 2 in a row and you're 2 seconds from doing it again, can you come back after that moment and still be who you are? That was what the challenge was to me,
Mhm.
and as hard as that looked and hard as it felt and as hard as it was on all the people around me, I took it like this, okay, you knew this was going to happen sometime. Are you going to be the real deal or not? And so that is well beyond just achieving and accomplishments and putting, pelts on the wall or whatever, it's not about that.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up here, but I am going to put you on the hot seat for a second. As a coach, it's inevitable. You're going to make some controversial calls, okay? Especially if they don't go your way. You've coached a long time, biggest games possible, Super Bowls, national championships. One call I was thinking about specifically, and it's interesting you didn't mention it. It's probably the most controversial call you've ever made. Respectfully looking back at your career, and it's going to be tough for you to defend it. It's early 2000s. You got to pick a starting strong safety. You got Troy Polamalu, Kyle Matthews. You went with Troy. I mean, looking back, it's safe to say that probably wasn't a good decision given how mediocre of a player and career he had. What went through your head? Like, why'd you do that? Yeah.
Well, sorry, man, but it was pretty obvious. He's
Was
one of
it?
the greatest players I've ever been around.
I just
It
thought
was
it was.
just get out of his way.
I
You
just.
remember the time we practiced and he went nuts and
Oh, he went.
somebody
He went
cracked
second.
back
Somebody
on
cracked
him.
back to him,
Yeah,
and he started
he
attacking
got so pissed
everybody.
he
Yeah.
ruined the practice. We had to call practice off.
Yeah, we had to
He was
call
going
him.
to kill somebody.
I had convinced myself he just had better hair.
That's that chip.
Yeah.
That's that chip.
Yeah.
And never let anybody get over you.
No.
The nicest, calmest, most compassionate
Sweetheart.
person.
That's what I tell everybody.
Sweethearted kid.
He does it. He talks like this.
Yeah.
But a savage on the
if
field.
you
Yeah.
knock that chip, man, look at
No, it was a blessing to play with. And it's a great story for me because they're like, oh, why didn't you go to the NFL at Matthews? I'm like, oh, well, Troy. They're like, oh, that makes total sense. Like, no, it wouldn't have mattered if he was there or not. But it's a great story. But anyway, I got you because you were probably sitting there like, oh, what's he going to ask right now? But Pete, I can't
You
thank
got
you
me.
enough. It's been such a blessing to sit with you. Congratulations on all your success. I'm rooting big time. I can't wait to see what you do with the Raiders. Thank you so much. Unbeknownst to you, you had such a positive effect on all of us, but I can only speak for myself. So much of what I've done in my career and in building Matthews and how I run it is literally just copying you. It's just, hey guys, we're going to win forever. We have theme days. We have Tell the Truth Monday.
There you go.
To Proposal Tuesday, competition Thursday, and
I can't tell you how good that is to hear because it really that's the passing it along
Yeah.
and seeing guys achieve, and you've done such a remarkable job in building a company and building a big fortune for the family and the future and all of that. Those are the great rewards, and we got a lot of our guys are doing really well. Not everybody, but a lot of our guys are doing really well, and the more we hear of it and the more it comes back at us, the more beautiful the whole process was.
I
So,
appreciate you and
it,
your
man.
time. Go Raiders.
Congrats. Go Raiders.
Thanks, Coach.
Thanks, man.